Have you ever felt your heart break for someone you never had the chance to meet? Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness in the world of rock, has left behind not just music, but millions of strangers mourning as though they'd lost a beloved member of their own family. For days now, the world of music has been cloaked in sorrow. Who could ever forget those tear-filled eyes, that haunting smile he wore in his final days? He wasn't just a legend. He was a once-in-a-lifetime force of nature. There may never be another Ozzy Osbourne, but this loss wasn't felt by fans alone. It was a heartbreak too deep for words, most painfully for Sharon, the woman who stood beside him through decades of chaos and redemption. In his final days, what he longed for most wasn't the roar of the crowd or the bright stage lights. It was something far more intimate, that Sharon might still hear his voice even after he was gone. In a final act of devotion, he left behind a quiet, heartbreakingly beautiful gift. Not for the world, but for the woman and children he loved most. Before we journey into that last chapter, let us each raise a quiet thumb in farewell, sending Ozzy Osbourne into eternity. At exactly 1 p.m. on July 30th, 2025, the city of Birmingham fell completely silent. His funeral procession moved slowly down Broad Street. His grieving family led the way, followed by a sea of fans dressed in black, their eyes swollen with sorrow, their hearts unbearably heavy. But before the final flowers were laid, before the last note of music dissolved into silence, before the world wept over his final farewell to Sharon, let us go back, just for a moment, return to the stillness of his final hours, to that quiet, devastating goodbye of a legend, the moment when life dimmed, but love refused to fade. In those last days, their countryside estate was cloaked in a silence so thick, it seemed to muffle even time itself. The echoes of guitar riffs, late-night laughter, the beautiful chaos that once filled their home, all gone. In their place, stillness. A stillness that seeped into every wall, every floorboard, like sorrow settling in. Ozzy's room became his final stage. Dimly lit by a single narrow window, the soft light of morning would gently spill in each day. But there were no fans, no screaming crowds. Just Sharon, always present, never more than a breath away. She never left him. Every morning she brewed his tea, strong, no sugar, just the way he liked it. She sat beside him, adjusting pillows, dimming the lights, holding his hand through every tremor. Parkinson's had taken his body from him, slowly, cruelly. Some days he couldn't lift a spoon, others he could barely whisper, but it never touched his eyes. Those wild, storm-filled eyes still burned with that flicker of mischief, that unbreakable fire. This body's finished, but the brain's still partying, he rasped one night, flashing a pale grin. But Sharon couldn't always smile back. Behind every soft chuckle was a scream she never let him hear. Because what do you do? What can you do when the love of your life fades right in front of you? Not all at once, but in painful, relentless pieces. She watched him drop his spoon, miss his mouth, struggle just to say her name. She saw the weight he could no longer carry, not with his hands, but with his heart. Some afternoons he would stare quietly out the window, lost in places only he could see. He drifted back to Aston, to 4 children huddled in a freezing room. Dust in his lungs, laughter bouncing off the walls of poverty. He remembered the first time he heard John Lennon's voice, the first rehearsal with Tony and Bill, that first night on stage. "I thought I was going to throw up," he chuckled weakly, "but they screamed, Sharon. They screamed." The memories washed over him, waves of joy, of shame, of fire, of forgiveness. And Sharon held each one as if they were made of glass. She read him old letters. She whispered stories from their youth. She played recordings of the kids from when they were small. Jack's giggle, Amy's quiet singing, Kelly calling him, "My rock star daddy." And Ozzy wept, slow, silent, soul-deep tears that rolled down a face once painted for battle. "Don't let them remember me like this," he whispered one night. "Not in this bed. Not like this." That shattered her, because for once, not even love was enough. No fame, no doctor, no devotion could save him. And still, She smiled through her pain. Because he needed her to. Because even in his last days, Ozzy was still her storm, her love, her legend. And every quiet moment in that room became a goodbye she had to swallow whole. He was slipping away. And Sharon, who had weathered decades of fire and fury, now faced a battle she could not win. Her grief began before his heart stopped, a slow, suffocating unraveling that wrapped tighter with every breath he lost. But in those final hours, something else stirred within those walls. Something deeper than grief, a promise, a final whisper. Not a grand gesture, but a quiet, eternal gift. Love so deep, it would outlive death itself. And when the world fell silent, as Ozzy Osbourne took his final breath, he left behind more than just a name. He left behind a legacy carved from pain, rebellion, brilliance, and yes, even unfathomable wealth. Ozzy Osbourne's estate was valued at more than $220 million, a monument to 5 decades of relentless passion. His endless tours spanned continents. His platinum records thundered from generation to generation. His reality shows unveiled chaos and love alike. Each chapter forging a shadow-drenched empire, transformed into gold by sheer force of will. He sold over 100 million records, some with Black Sabbath, others solo. Each album echoing not just applause, but royalties set to ripple long into the silence left behind. His wealth, though vast, was never cold. It was lived, fought for. It soaked in every scream, every relapse, every resurrection. His homes scattered across the globe were never just property. They were cathedrals of survival. In Buckinghamshire stood a countryside manor, as grand as it was haunted, complete with its own rehab wing, because even kings need places to fall. A penthouse of sky-high solitude in Sierra Towers, mansions in Beverly Hills and Hancock Park that wore stories of breakdown and comeback like wallpaper. These were not just addresses, they were chapters, scars made of stone. And beneath these roofs, his cars stood like dark, elegant beasts. An Audi R8 shimmering like midnight oil, a Ferrari 458 growling louder than any amp, a Rolls-Royce Phantom carrying more ghosts than passengers. Vintage British machines stood too, reminders of a man born from soot who built his kingdom in leather and lightning. But nothing, neither platinum albums, nor estates, nor polished chrome, defined him more than what all of it stood for: defiance, legacy, proof that a boy from the back streets of Birmingham could scream his way into history. Even in the final flickers of life, he didn't think of luxury. He thought of resonance, his impact, his echo. And now those left behind must do more than mourn. They must carry on. Sharon, Jack, Kelly, Amy, they are not just inheritors of wealth, they are keepers of weight. They carry the empire, yes, but also the burden, the flame, the unfinished chorus of a life too loud to ever fade quietly. Who among them will step forward and hold what he left behind? Not just the riches, but the ache, the mission, the thunder of a man who never asked to be eternal, yet became it anyway. But perhaps the most soul-stirring movement in Ozzy Osbourne's final opus wasn't captured in riffs or refrains. It was etched in ink, waiting with intention, soaked in goodbye at the summit of a life worth over $220 million. He never saw his immense fortune as a monument to excess, but rather as the final verse in a deeply personal symphony, one only he could compose. In the quiet months of early 2024, while his body began its slow retreat, Ozzy's mind remained as sharp and defiant as ever. With unwavering clarity, not fear, he signed his final will. At the heart of it stood Sharon, his unwavering anchor through every high and hell, along with his 5 beloved children. Each name was chosen with intention, each provision shaped by love, not just to preserve his wealth, but to reflect his soul. Yet what truly made this testament extraordinary were the names it carried beyond his bloodline. He left behind significant endowments to mental health organizations, sanctuaries for those whose inner battles echo louder than applause. He gave generously to support networks that catch broken musicians before the stage devours them whole. And to youth programs, sparks for the kids who, like young Ozzy once was, didn't find salvation in school books, but in secondhand guitars, garage bands, and a dream too loud to be silenced. Even the voiceless were remembered. A large portion of his estate was pledged to animal rescues and permanent shelter funding, a quiet tribute to the dogs who had stood beside him when the world turned away. Creatures who never judged his darkest moments, only leaned closer and loved him harder. In the end, it wasn't the Buckinghamshire estate, the platinum discs, or even the phantom in his garage that brought Sharon to tears. It was this, his final act of grace. A will not built from gold, but from gratitude. A parting gift that gave voice to pain, hope to strangers, and a legacy that reached far beyond the stage. It began with the lilies, white lilies. One bouquet, then another, and another, delivered every morning, starting the day after Ozzy drew his final breath. No note, no name, just that unmistakable fragrance, sharp, sweet, and piercing. The one he always said reminded him of her. "You smell like them when you laugh," he once whispered, back when laughter came easy and life still roared around them like thunder. At first, Sharon thought it was a kind gesture, a friend perhaps, or a morning fan paying quiet tribute. But the lilies kept arriving. Same hour, same paper wrapping, same devastating grace. By the third morning, the florist phoned. Her voice was soft, almost reverent. "These deliveries were arranged in advance, Mrs. Osbourne," she said gently. "They're scheduled to arrive every single day for the rest of your life." Then came the note. Not one meant for the public or preserved in a will, but hidden like a love song never meant for charts. "Even when I'm gone, you'll never be alone." That was the moment Sharon broke, not with tears or screams, but with a silence so deep it shook the walls of their empty home. Because this wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't about image or estate. It wasn't for the world. It was for her, and only her. A final vow from a man who had made her suffer, made her fight, made her stay, but also made her whole. In secret, while his body failed him, Ozzy had arranged the only thing he believed might keep her breathing when he no longer could. A ritual of remembrance. He chose lilies because they thrived in morning light, just like she always had. He ensured there was no end date, no clause, no condition. The flowers would arrive daily, as long as she lived. A whisper on the doorstep, a heartbeat in the silence. It wasn't just romance, it was atonement, because Sharon had saved him again and again from his demons and from himself. And this small, quiet ache wrapped in white petals was his final way of saying thank you, of saying sorry, of saying I love you one last time. She never asked for it, would have given all the lilies in the world to have him instead. But now each morning, she walks the same path, opens the same door, and holds those flowers to her chest. She breathes. The pain doesn't fade, but neither does the love. The flowers cannot fix what's broken, but they remind her. He was real. He was hers. And while the world mourns the loss of a rock god, Sharon mourns her storm, her fire, her forever. And so, the lilies keep coming, until the day her hands can no longer open that door. The funeral was never meant to be a sorrowful goodbye. It was a final show, just without a stage. At precisely 1 p.m. on July 30th, 2025, Broad Street in Birmingham came to a standstill. Not in silence, but in reverence. Not cloaked in mourning, but draped in music. Fans dressed in black lined every inch of pavement. Their eyes brimmed with tears, yes, but also with light. The kind that comes from memory, not despair. There were no muted sobs, no organ hymns. Instead, the city pulsed with sound, raw, unpolished, alive. Not the anthems you might expect. No crazy train, no bark at the moon. Ozzy had made his wishes very clear. "That bloody compilation makes me want to crawl into a bin," he once grumbled. And so his send-off was different. There was no greatest hits set list. Instead, as his casket moved through the crowd, the speakers played A Day in the Life by the Beatles, a track he once called the sound of my soul unraveling and rebuilding in 4 minutes. The song swelled and fell like a wave, chaotic, beautiful, untamed. Just like him. Inside the private service, Sharon did not wear a veil. There was no carefully scripted eulogy. She wore black, deep, clean, defiant, as if her sorrow had been tailored into the fabric itself. Their children, Jack, Kelly, Amy, Louis, and Jessica, stood beside her, each one holding stories instead of tissues. The room was sacred not for its silence, but for the space it held, a space for grief and for joy. And then came the voice, Ozzy's voice, crackling from the speakers. "If anyone's crying like a soggy muppet, I'll come back and slap you." Laughter burst through tears. His humor had been his shield, and now it became theirs. Another clip played, softer this time. "Don't be too sad, love. I'm just backstage having a pint." No one needed to speak. That moment was the eulogy. Ozzy had once joked about having Susan Boyle or Justin Bieber at his funeral. "Whatever makes him smile," he shrugged. He wasn't mocking, he meant it. Because to him, music wasn't about categories, it was about connection. He never fit into one box. Not in rock, not in rehab, not in society's version of salvation. He was a contradiction wrapped in leather, fierce yet gentle, broken yet whole, wild yet endlessly kind. Outside, the band played Sabbath, not in thunderous riffs, but in jazz-laced echoes. Iron Man became a hymn. War Pigs whispered like prayer. And the crowd, oh, the crowd. They weren't just mourners. They were a chorus, a congregation of souls tethered by one man's music and madness. One lifted his shirt to reveal a trembling tattoo, Ozzy's signature inked over his heart. Another whispered, "He saved my life when nothing else did." Because that was Ozzy's greatest gift, not just the songs, but the mirror. He reflected our darkest corners and made them sing. When the final chords of "A Day in the Life" faded into sky, Sharon stepped forward. She held a bouquet of white lilies, her hand trembling, her spine unbowed. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The flowers spoke the truth. He's gone, but not quietly, never quietly. Ozzy didn't exit the world in silence. He left it the only way he knew how. Loud, true, unforgettable. And when the applause rose, not mournful, but grateful, it was as if even death itself had honored his wish. No chaos, no spectacle, just music and memory. The world may one day raise another rock legend, but it will never again give us another Ozzy Osbourne. Because Ozzy wasn't unforgettable simply for what he did. He was unforgettable for who he was. Not polished, not perfect, not immune to pain or destruction. He was a man who bled in plain sight, who loved without armor, who failed where all could see, and still, somehow, always stood back up. And in doing so, he gave the shattered, the misfits, and the lost a reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, they still belonged in this world. He didn't shape culture through slogans. He shaped it through scars. Every relapse, every raw lyric, every teardrop he refused to hide. Ozzy taught us that survival isn't silence, it's defiance. That vulnerability roars louder than any Marshall stack. That being broken isn't the same as being done. He never called himself a hero. "I'm not a role model," he once said with a shrug. "I'm just still here." And that, being still here, after prison, after poverty, after addiction, disease, and shame, that was the miracle. That was the message. He redefined humanity in the spotlight, not by editing out his darkness, but by holding it up to the light and saying, "This is me, and I'm still worthy of love." And because he dared to believe that, he made us believe we might be too. His legacy isn't etched in platinum. It's etched in lives pulled back from the edge, in fans who didn't jump, because his voice reached them first, in people who found comfort not in perfection, but in his contradictions, his realness, broken yet whole, wild yet tender, chaotic yet so deeply human. And now the torch is passed, not just to Sharon, who still stands and speaks for mental health, just as she once stood beside him through his darkest storms. Not just to Jack and Kelly, who used their voices to talk about recovery and self-worth. Lessons learned from a father who never stopped learning, but to all of us, to anyone who ever found strength in his noise, to everyone who saw themselves in his shadows and stayed. Because every act they carry forward, every kindness, every confession, every choice to get back up, isn't about protecting a brand. It's about honoring a man who gave everything to become better. Ozzy never asked to be canonized. He never wanted to be remembered as a saint. He just didn't want his suffering to be wasted. So he turned it into melody, into meaning, into a reason for someone else to keep breathing. And that is why his passing doesn't feel like just the end of a man. It feels like the extinguishing of something rare, something irreplaceable, something holy. Because the truth that stings the most, the truth that burns quietly behind the eyes is this: there will never be another Ozzy Osbourne. Behind every burning legacy stands a woman who chose forgiveness over fury, devotion over despair. A quiet force whose love never demanded praise, only offered grace. Sharon Osbourne was far more than the woman behind the man. She was the storm shelter when the world crashed down. The hand that reached through addiction, betrayal, relapse, and ruin, and never let go. In a world that cheered Ozzy's madness but ignored his pain, it was Sharon who stayed behind the curtain, carefully stitching the man back together from the wreckage of myth. When the world called him a god, she reminded him he was human. And when the world wrote him off as broken, she reminded him he was still worth saving, again and again. She carried the weight of fame's darkest shadows, not out of obligation, but out of love so fierce it bore disappointment without resentment, heartbreak without bitterness. She forgave things no heart should ever have to forgive, not because she was weak, but because she believed that even damaged souls deserve redemption. Ozzy stumbled, he fell, he shattered at times, and Sharon was the only one who kept walking toward him, picking up the pieces, often cutting her own hands in the process, never once expecting applause. The world saw the headlines, she saw the wounds. The world heard the screams, she heard the silence between them. Through scandal, sickness, relapse after relapse, she did not walk away. She walked closer. Because Sharon didn't love the legend. She loved the man who at times couldn't even love himself. Her strength wasn't in spectacle, it was in silence. In the 1,000 unspoken moments that kept a marriage, a family, and a man alive when the world expected them all to collapse. In the end, Ozzy left behind platinum records, sold-out arenas, a rock and roll name carved into history. But what he left Sharon was quieter, deeper, stronger. The pieces of a love only they could understand. A love written in sacrifice, in survival, in surrender, and in the silence that remains when a soul says goodbye, but a heart still holds on. In the end, no words could ever match saying goodbye to someone who taught the world how to scream. Ozzy Osbourne didn't simply drift through life. He collided with it, bleeding, flawed, rising again and again through chaos. He never claimed perfection, never asked to be sanctified. He was raw, broken, and painfully real. And it was exactly that honesty that gave others courage. Legends don't disappear quietly. They fracture reality by leaving, and we're left with echoes, starting soft, swelling into a deafening absence. Ozzy's life was messy, marked by struggle, but filled with conscience. He turned suffering into song. He sang survival. He showed us that falling apart could still be beautiful. He was never the polished idol the world expected, but a mirror reflecting our own imperfections and struggles. His legacy isn't measured by platinum records or royalties. It's found in redemption. By turning failure into music, every lyric into hope, every misstep into connection between the wounded and the world. He made survival itself an act of courage. Now the amps are silent, the spotlight has dimmed, and the voice we thought would echo forever lies quiet. Yet his presence remains unmistakable, in the headphones of a teenager who's still finding their own voice, in the hands of a fan picking at "Mama, I'm Coming Home" on a dusty old guitar, in the hearts of those who felt invisible until Ozzy howled their pain loud enough to be heard. Grief will come in waves, so will gratitude. Perhaps that's what Ozzy would have wanted, not quiet mourning, but bold remembrance. Remember him loud, fierce, and fully. Ozzy Osbourne didn't leave this world in silence. He departed in the only way he knew, through sound, love, and defiance. Here's to the Prince of Darkness, the Birmingham boy who became legendary not by being perfect, but by being deeply human. Here's to the man who made chaos sacred, madness poetic, and survival a song worth singing. Ozzy, if you're listening from wherever legends rest, we heard you, we still hear you, in the silence, in the static, and in the cracks between our broken melodies. You live on. Thank you for the chaos, for the courage, for the kind of love that bled freely. Rest now, in permanence, not just peace, because the world doesn't just miss you, it remembers you, and it always will.